Well, let's talk a little bit about DNS. Now, by default, Island is its own DNS server for your network. So all of your computers and other devices on the network, by default, when they get an IP address from the island also tells it to use the island to look up host names for internet access. So it is the DNS server for your network. Now, this DNS server is built into Island. It can be disabled for certain special conditions, like if you're running for your own DHCP server and DNS server on the network. That's common with like Microsoft Active Directory networks, that type of thing. Then you can disable the DHCP server in the island on an interface by interface basis. But by default, it is enabled. Now, when Island needs to look up a domain name or host name for the first time, it obviously has to go out and query DNS servers on the internet. By default, Island uses what's called DNS over HTTPS. That's its default configuration. Let's go look at that. Click on the main hamburger menu on the Island and go down to Network. We'll scroll down and you'll notice here where it says DNS, it says by DNS over HTTPS or DoH. And if I click there, we'll see several options. We'll talk about recursive in a minute. By default, we use DNS over HTTPS. Now, actually, as it's shipped from the factory, it uses Cloudflare as the DoH provider. But if you like, you can change that and select Google instead. Now, for the real tech types out there, we actually do support custom DoH servers, but that has to be configured, at least today, through the CLI. You can't do that through the app. So here you can choose what type of DoH server, what type of DNS server you want to use, and whether you use Google or Cloudflare right here in this screen. Now we also support the old traditional recursive mode of doing DNS. And if you choose that, then of course your DNS requests are going over the internet unencrypted so that your internet provider can actually see what sites you're looking up and so on. Now, I will say it's important to understand we never use your ISP's provided DNS servers. We actually are, we are a fully recursive DNS server, and we will start at the root level and work down. If you're not a tech type, don't worry about what that means, other than to know that your ISP is not the one providing your DNS services. So if you have an ISP, and there's not too many of those in the wild today, but there was a time when internet providers were trying to redirect search queries and other things by intercepting and altering DNS requests in flight. Well, with DNS over HTTPS, your provider can no longer do that because your ISP can never see the DNS requests or modify them. It's encrypted all the way to the selected DoH provider. In recursive mode, it is still possible, however, for your ISP to see and possibly intercept those requests. So that's why DNS over HTTPS is chosen by default, and normally we recommend that you leave it in that configuration. There is one other configuration option I should mention, and that is always use island. Now this is enabled by default, and what it means is that well, I mentioned earlier how the island is it it announces itself as the DNS server for all of the devices on your network. So when we assign an IP address via DHCP to a particular device, a computer or IoT device or what have you, we tell it to use the island for performing DNS. However, there's nothing to prevent a device from choosing its own DNS server, and sometimes that's the case. If you have this option enabled right here, always use island, then we will intercept recursive DNS requests for any server and we will respond to them as if we were that server. So, for example, let's say you have a device on the network that is just hardwired to use 8.8.8.8. A lot of people use that, Google's DNS service. It's not unusual to see devices, even some IoT devices shipped from the factory will use 8.8.8.8 instead of the assigned DNS server from, that's advertised by the DHCP service. If this option here is enabled where it says always use island, then if we see a DNS request for some other DHCP server on the internet, excuse me, DNS server on the internet, such as 8.8.8.8 or any other one, we will intercept that request and respond to it ourselves. Um, and that actually is, there's two reasons for this. One is performance, because obviously we can respond, since we're local to the network, we can respond much quicker than the DNS server that you're querying out on the internet. The other is that it provides an additional level of security because based on the filters that you have configured on your island, whether it's the, predefined umbrella filters or custom filter, we can actually do that test, to look for filtered websites and prohibited websites at the DNS level. So if we see a DNS request for a prohibited category of website, we block it right then. We don't even allow the DNS request to succeed. We fail that DNS request. So it's both for performance reasons and for security reasons. There are rare cases where you may need to turn this option off. For example, if you have a VPN set up into a company, and in order to access company resources, you're required to use their DNS server, then you don't want the island to intercept those DNS requests. So you can turn this off, and island will allow those requests for external DNS services to go through. We will not intercept them in that case. Otherwise, you can leave it on, and you're guaranteed that any DNS requests will always be answered by the island. Then once you set this to the settings you want, just click save, and you're done.